one scientist calculated in one of the research things, and he suggested, this is an Indian scientist about 5 or 7 years ago, he suggested that our total accumulated radiation throughout a day is like sitting in a microwave for 19 minutes.
Oh, wow.
So even though it's low powered, right, and some people...
We're on slow cook.
We're on slow cook. And so we mentioned sleep. Sleep is one of the most important things that we can do to our bodies because our body regenerates at night.
Right.
But if we have light that's on, say we sleep with all the lights on, or we sleep in, say, Alaska in the summertime, right, where it's light 24/7, our body doesn't go into that deep sleep because it thinks it's daytime. So we have various components of our bodies that can recognize light, not through our eyes.
Your pineal gland, right?
Your pineal gland comes through your eyes, right? But we have these things that sense light, even like in our cells. And so if our bodies sense that there's light, and it's not just the visible light that we see, which is the red through the blue, right, or red through violet that we see, it's also the ultraviolet and the infrared and all the microwaves and the cosmic rays and and all these other rays, and even some of the lower frequency radiation from our electrical systems and dirty electricity.
Right.
So when our bodies see that, though, we're not able to get to sleep.
And that
we don't
impacts our
produce
health.
we don't produce. So normally we'd produce melatonin over the course of a night, and we get this nice healthy dose of melatonin, and we need that for our immune system, and we need that for things like fertility and things like that. And then as we start to wake up, that starts to drop. It's a hormone in the body, and so it drops off, and then we go through our day, and then at night we build it up. But what happens is when people are exposed to electromagnetic radiation, it's almost the same way if you just slept in this type of bright environment, they don't make much melatonin.
And also when they're looking at their iPad or their Kindle or
their TV
laptop,
at night, or their TV at night.
Is that blue light you're talking about?
Well, it's not. I would say it's probably not just blue light, because we're usually talking about, if it's the case of a monitor, we're talking about dirty electricity.
Okay.
So we're talking about electromagnetic interference. If
So
you
that's
want to use an engineering,
disrupting kind of like our circadian rhythm. Is that
absolutely
what it is?
And that's where it's also affecting the melatonin too.
The building biologists focus on the sleeping area as one of the high priority areas to mitigate the effects of the electromagnetic radiation. Is that right? And also maybe some of these chemical
and in
issues.
a perfect world, we'd have this solved everywhere, so that we don't have to worry about this anywhere. But the sleep sanctuary, the sleeping environment, is the most important thing.
And you've helped people that were actually getting referrals from doctors. Is that correct?
I have an environmental medicine background too, so I work very closely with doctors and train doctors on how to do some of this stuff too. Because they don't really understand the prevention. Most of them, 98% of doctors or 99% of doctors out there, they don't have any awareness or understanding of this. Some are just starting to.
I think there was a conference recently in California geared toward the medical profession with respect to electromagnetic radiation, because they're not trained in medical school necessarily to identify the symptoms of someone who's being adversely impacted by the EMFs, electromagnetic fields in their environment.
You nailed it. So my really good friend and colleague, Lynn Patrick, Dr. Lynn Patrick, she organized that when she was organizing that with Bill Ray, who was a big he was kind of the father of, chemical and environmental medicine, or, one of the fathers of that. Theon Randolph, back in the 70s, who came up with the ecology movement of medicine, was probably the bigger, person in that. But Bill Ray just passed away recently, and Lynn Patrick helped organize with other people a conference in Scotts Valley called the EMF conference, or electromagnetic fields conference, or whatever they called it, but the EMF conference of 2019. And they did talk about a lot of that stuff and started to bring awareness, but this is still a very tiny niche group within medicine.
Yes.
And most of these people still don't fully understand, when people walk in, that the symptoms they're seeing are actually related to that in the home, because they don't know the home.
Right.
But so they know it conceptually, but they don't know exactly what it looks like. We don't know what being poisoned by your lamp next to your bedside exactly looks like, or what sleeping with a cell phone next to you playing all night. We don't know exactly what that looks like, and it may look different in different people.
Right.
From the medical side.
So can you explain why federal regulations, as they are right now, are inadequate to protect us from electromagnetic radiation? I mean, federal guidelines, I should say. They're not regulations
here. So different countries have different standards, and a lot of them base it off of the international standards. And the short answer to your question is that there's a lot of industry and military that are involved in setting those guidelines and standards internationally and nationally.
So our government agency isn't independent.
No,
like the
in fact,
FCC, for example.
I think the Edmund, I'm maybe forgetting the name, but I think it's like the Edmund Safra Center at Harvard, published about 5 years or so ago a 50-page paper on the fact that the Federal Trade Communications agency was thoroughly captured by industry and military, and that they didn't have health as, at their basis or even in their consideration. And I think they didn't even have
the FCC,
MDs.
You mean?
I'm sorry, I didn't mean the federal, the FCC.
Yeah.
Federal
Okay.
Communications.
Well, but technically, so that's kind of like the political aspect. How about from the technical aspect? They're talking about something called thermal limits, right? So that's akin to what happens in a microwave oven. We're cooking our food with the same type of radiation that actually comes from cell phones,
That's right.
but just at a higher power density. Is that right?
Yeah, it is correct. But there's thermal effects and there's non-thermal effects. So let me give you an example.
And the government, just to clarify before you go into that, our government is not recognizing the non-thermal effects as harmful when in these guidelines.
Right. So and it's funny because I present on this at scientific conferences and medical conferences when I talk about these subjects. But there's a cute little cartoon that I show in there, which is based on a British TV show called Yes, Prime Minister, back from the 80s. And they were really good at spinning everything and trying to confuse everybody. And so what they're really good at doing is saying, hey, we're only going to consider this in our scientific methodologies. And so then they look at that with those really strict criteria, not looking at everything. In other words, we're just going to look at heating effects. And we say, oh, it doesn't heat. So therefore, there's no harm that we can observe. And thus, our standards are based on where it can heat.
So it's like willful blindness in a way. They're kind of looking away from, they're narrowing their focus in a way that undermines the
integrity in the science.
The integrity of the science.
Without question. And the integrity of keeping people healthy.
Right.
So the Naval Medical Research and plenty of other government agencies established that these exposures were highly toxic, and that even at non-thermal effects, it could have an effect, say, on your heart.
And these exposures, when you say these exposures, you're talking about microwave radiation, which is the type used with our cell phones and all wireless communication.
We are, and I and some of my colleagues published a paper for the University of Colorado Boulder maybe 5 years or so ago through Deborah Davis. We did work with Deborah Davis and Tony Stein and Carl Riley and Alex Statner, who's another building biologist out in San Francisco. We published a paper going into some of this, but even in the outside of the wireless, like even our wired component, and we didn't touch on dirty electricity in this article, we just focused on the magnetic radiation. But Linda Wertheimer back in 1979, I think I don't remember what school, she was at the University of Colorado Boulder, but I think she actually was. But Linda Wertheimer wrote the pioneering article in that, and so a lot of research has been done over the last almost 40 years now in that. So it's not just the microwave radiation portion of it, it's also the wired portion of things.
Okay. So the science is there, it's just not getting the attention from corporate media that it deserves, basically.
That's correct. And I would even say most alternative media doesn't really focus that much on it. It's really, and there's a lot of alternative that's still institutional media. Yeah. But it's a lot of the really independent media that's focusing on that. And
so you're going back to your practice. Have you come across clients that were electrosensitive and maybe they didn't even realize it?
Yeah. So,
and what is electrosensitivity or hypersensitivity?
So, and there's a lot of us in the medical community who have a problem with this word electrosensitivity, electrohypersensitivity. They even call it sometimes idiopathic environmental intolerance, which is the more term that they use to try to make it, sweep it under the rug and say it's psychogenic or it's psychosomatic. Yeah. But in essence, where we're going with, and I just lost my train of thoughts.
Well, it's like toxic to everyone, right? I mean, that's the problem I would have with that term is when you say someone's electrosensitive, I would say I'm chemically sensitive, but in reality, it's toxic to everybody. We just have our check engine light flashing, whereas other people, maybe they are not getting the alarm. The alarm's not going off.
Some people have had that alarm on for so long that their body doesn't waste the time because it has to do so many things.
Yeah.
It doesn't have the time to focus on trying to alert them because
Right.
they've ignored it.
Right.
And their doctors don't know what to do with it because you come in and present to your doctor, and your doctor's like, oh, well, you have this symptom and this, we're going to call it this disease. And then, oh, you have inflammation. Oh, you have heart, you have a heart thing, or you have asthma. So we're going to treat the asthma, but you can't treat it until you get to the root problem.
Right. So we're treating symptoms instead of underlying cause. So